All right, so let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour, where it is day 3 of the Republican National Convention that has now come to an end. The convention concluded with U.S. Vice President and also Donald Trump's running mate Mike Pence's scathing speech attacking the Democrats. Now, he also made some rather startling comments like the people of America will not be safe in Joe Biden's America. He took a dig at the Democrats' policies on defunding the police and also destroying fossil fuels. He went ahead calling Biden as a Trojan horse, a reference to an ancient Greek deceptive horse that had led to the fall of the city of Troy.
President Trump has stood without apology for the sanctity of human life every day of this administration. Joe Biden, he supports taxpayer funding of abortion right up to the moment of birth. When you consider their agenda, it's clear. Joe Biden would be nothing more than a Trojan horse for the radical left. The choice in this election has never been clearer, and the stakes have never been higher.
And just like other Republican speeches, Mike Pence also slammed the Black Lives Matter protesters. He said that violence and vandalism is not the way to hold protests, and everyone who has torn down public property will be quote-unquote prosecuted.
President Trump and I will always support the right of Americans to peaceful protest. But rioting and looting is not peaceful protest. Tearing down statues is not free speech. And those who do so will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Last week, Joe Biden didn't say one word about the violence and chaos engulfing cities across this country. So let me be clear. The violence must stop, whether in Minneapolis, Portland, or Kenosha. Too many heroes have died defending our freedom to see Americans strike each other down. We will have law and order on the streets of this country for every American of every race and creed and color.
Now, Mike Pence also lauded Trump administration's handling of the coronavirus pandemic and claimed that all schools will reopen as soon as next week. Now, Pence also spoke on the same lines as the State Secretary Mike Pompeo. Pence said that the Americans need not fear about anything, as Trump had taken down the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, referring to the assassination carried out by the Americans in the first week of this year. The Second Lady of the United States, Karen Pence, also spoke at length about her husband and Donald Trump's collective leadership. She said that the two know how to put America first.
Many of our veteran heroes struggle as they transition back into civilian. Chris credits art therapy.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what in fact unfolded today, and also to give us a bit of an insight on Mike Pence's speech at the Republican convention, we are joined in by Jagruti Dave, who's been tracking all the events very closely for us, and she's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Now, good evening to you, Jagruti. Now, this was a rather an interesting speech that we heard from the Vice President of the United States. And this is something that would be looked at and compared with what was said by the First Lady of the United States. And there was a clear contrast. He spoke about the violence in the United States. He also touched upon the racial tensions and the fault lines within the American society. But some would in fact look at it and say that it was tone deaf because he did not touch upon the reason as to why the protests are actually taking place in the United States.
Yes, he did not mention the shooting of Jacob Blake, but focused instead on the protests that have happened subsequently, some of which have become violent, and the emphasis on law and order, which has really been the central theme of the day, and a message that President Trump has been pushing for a while now, this argument that he is the champion of law and order, that is President Trump and his administration, and that interesting comment that America would not be safe under Joe Biden, despite the fact that actually the the current protests and the civil unrest that we're seeing is happening in President Trump and Mike Pence's America. Melania Trump's speech was specifically designed in many ways to be optimistic, to present the administration in a softer light. But Mike Pence's rhetoric really chimed in with a lot of what other speakers were saying throughout the convention so far, which is presenting a very dark and ominous vision of what America would face under Democratic leadership. And so Mike Pence's was no different. And as the president has done before, he lauded the administration's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, Mike Pence headed up the White House's coronavirus task force. He also mentioned Hurricane Laura, which is due to strike the Louisiana-Texas border in the next few hours, and is expected to be quite a devastating a hurricane. And he expressed sympathies for those in the path of the storm, but also said that there would be federal assistance to those in the areas affected.
You know, the election is just a few days away. This, of course, is the last stretch of campaigning, and President Trump, one would think, would be looking at the events unfolding in the United States with a fair bit of nervousness. How is the Republican camp approaching this election? Because they're struck by the coronavirus pandemic, and then there are these racial tensions that are unfolding there. The economy has obviously tanked because of the lockdowns. How confident is the Trump's camp in approaching this election?
Well, there are several issues at play that you mentioned. Look, yes, the coronavirus has hit the American economy, but what a lot of the focus has been on was how great everything was before the pandemic, trying to remind people of the days before, and then blaming the virus on China and saying this is what China has done to the country. So as well as tying the economy and the issues that it's having to specifically to the attacks on China, the anti-China narrative has been a common refrain throughout. And the convention is likely to be one throughout the campaign, suggesting that Joe Biden and the Democrats are soft on China. That is a common argument, even though criticisms of China is quite a bipartisan issue in America, on Capitol Hill. Another issue is obviously the protests and racial tensions in the United States. And as we've just been discussing, the president's emphasis has been on law and order, claiming that the Democrats are going to be soft on protesters, are going to be soft on law and order. Now, as well as these issues, it's the character of Joe Biden that they're trying to attack as well. It's interesting because they're trying to attack Joe Biden for being in the thrall of the left of the party, but they're also trying to they're also trying to present Joe Biden as somebody who is sort of not essentially going to oversee a dark time for the country. So it's interesting how all of these issues are really going to build up. The themes that we've been seeing during the convention are really going to build up towards the election. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, President Trump has his base and they are fervent supporters. Has he done enough? Can he do enough in the run-up to the election to win over those who might be uncertain as to who they're going to vote for, the swing voters, the independents? Can he speak beyond his base? That is a question that a lot of people are asking.
That, of course, is something that remains to be seen. Thank you very much indeed, Jagruti, for joining us from Washington, D.C. and getting us all those insights. It was a very interesting speech by Mike Pence. It, of course, needs to be seen as to how the American public would, of course, view it.